Hello and welcome to the August 26th edition of the Cluster API provider AWS Office Hours, a sub-project of both Cluster API and SIG Cluster Lifecycle. We have a relatively short agenda today, so please go ahead and add anything if you have it. I am putting the link in the chat right now. The first item on the agenda, I wanted to just give a PSA that going forward, all image building will be done with the sigs.k8s.io image builder. Most of the work that we had in place got migrated over to the vSphere provider, and then that got imported in there. And I have some tweaks that I need to make to it to finish off the support, and I hope to land those today. But I'm in the process of building the 1.14.5, 1.14.6, 1.15.2, and 1.15.3 images. And all of those will also include an update to container version 1.2.8, as well as a fix that Daniel found. We were publishing older kubelet serving certificates in the images, so it's going to include a fix for that as well.
Sorry, I've got the wrong screen shared here. I realized what my problem was, and it was I had an outdated link on the sharing. All right, let me get the right one up here.
And on that, do we have any other topics before we dive into the backlog grooming? All right, over to you, Andy.
Okay, so 993 is the last one we did. Is that accurate?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So what I ended up doing was just filtering all issues with no milestone. So looks like, Liz, we can close 981, right? Because you have code that went in that records the name of the machine into the config map control plane.
Only for V1 Alpha 1.
Yeah, so for V1 Alpha 2, that's going into the Qubit.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This was fixed. Okay, we have convert project to KubeBuilder v2. I'm pretty sure we got most, if not all of that in. I will double check with Chuck on this one, but I'm going to put it into the milestone for 040 V1 Alpha 2, and I would call this important soon. Alrighty, enhance the generate YAML script. I'm using generate YAML. I'd like the output directory to match the cluster name. Okay, we had a couple people who liked the idea. I don't know that this is necessary to get Alpha 2 out the door, but it would probably be nice to do. So I'll stick this in the 04 series, and we will give this a long-term priority. Sound reasonable?
Sounds good.
Okay. Define the image building process plus customize. When using KubeBuilder v2, the default is to modify the patch for usage during make Docker build. We should think about this. I'm going to say, given it's long term, we can just put this into the 04x release milestone and follow up with Chuck. All right. Rename controller manager in the config directory. KubeBuilder uses controller manager as the default name, but we can name it something else now. Something more relevant to an infrastructure provider. Okay. What do y'all think on this one? Do you want to do this before we release or sometime after?
I think we probably want to do it before release. That way we avoid any type of potential migration or issues.
This affects the name of the pod or deployment, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the name of the namespace and then controller manager, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, well, actually, this is related to the labels that we apply. So right now, we assign the labels. Control plane is the key, and controller manager is the value. So by doing that, by making it unique, means that if for some reason we do deploy all of the multiple components in the same namespace, you can actually run them alongside each other without issues with the deployments and replica sets.
So I'm looking, it may be that too, but I'm looking at the manager image patch YAML for Kappa, and the name of the deployment is controller manager.
Yeah, so I think we need to address both of those.
Yeah, so I think this basically needs to be, if we don't do it as part of this release, it's got to wait until Alpha 3, right? Because otherwise we need to deal with some sort of upgrade conversion plan to tell people you got to go delete this old deployment and then create this new one, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to make this a P0. We can name it anything other than controller manager, and or we just say you can't deploy anything else in this namespace that is a Cube Builder project, which I think is probably not a good one. So let's go ahead and make sure that we get this done ASAP. Alrighty. Surface all permission errors as events. This one, I imagine we would have to do a lot of surgery, right? Like anywhere that we talk to AWS and get some error back, we'd have to parse the error and potentially generate an event or events from it. And we could have a helper for it, but it means touching every single line of code where we talk to AWS, right?
Yeah, likely. I don't think it's reasonable for the initial 0.4 release.
Yeah, but it definitely could. I'm going to go with long term and 0.4x. And basically, the reason I'm not doing well, I mean, I guess we could do important soon and call it a P1, even though it's not in the this Friday's milestone. Let me do that. Make it a little bit more important. Alrighty, machines with replace instances don't join the cluster. This one was yours, Liz. I know, Jason, you and I discussed back and forth in GitHub. I think that we basically need to mark the machine as perma-failed in the event that we see that the EC2 instance has gone away.
That seems like a sensible outcome to me.
I'm going to put it in the milestone for 0.4. If it doesn't make it, it can come shortly after.
Doesn't that make it important long term?
Well, it would be great if somebody could do it this week from the community.
Gotcha.
But if they can't, I don't think we hold the release up because if this isn't implemented this week.
Okay.
And Jason, you were working on this Ubuntu one, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So would you call this a P0, given that it has cert stuff in there, or is it just bogus cert data?
So it's a self-signed cert for the kubelet, so I don't necessarily think it's critical, but it's not ideal, especially as the images age.
Okay. And add opportunity to modify listeners for ELB. They wanted to, I guess, add additional ports. Is that, or change the port?
Yeah, they wanted to add additional ports so that they could be able to access it over more than just 6443.
Oh, and Vince did this or not? Or this was part of it?
The field was added, but the actual implementation has not been done.
Okay, so basically, well, this lets you set one port being the API server port. They want to add additional ones, right? And right here, they say they want to add listeners. But yeah, it's hard to tell if they just want to change the port or if they want to keep this and have other ones too.
Yeah.
Although I guess if they're happy with this, then maybe this is enough. And we'll put this as long-term in 04X, and hopefully this will get them what they want. At least that's what it sounded like. Question from chat, is EKS control plane supported in Cluster API for AWS? Not right now. We are interested in trying to do that maybe as part of Alpha 3 or Alpha 4 when we talk about control plane management and managed service providers for Kubernetes, but it's not supported right now. All right. Using unmanaged VPC with subnets in different availability zones, the ELB for the API server is not configured correctly. So Terraform module for unmanaged VPC, no AZ specified, and they were created in different AZs. And the AZ or the ELB was only attached to one availability zone, not the one the control plane was in, and it failed. Is this something that we can identify and fix, do you think, Jason?
So this might be complicated because since it's user-provided networking, we don't necessarily know which of the subnets we should be inquiring about. But I don't see any reason why we couldn't potentially add both. But
so this is, like Aaron brought his own VPC and subnets, but Kappa still created an ELB. Is that accurate?
yeah. And what it is one was public, one was private, but we don't necessarily, know which is which, but we probably just picked one to determine what AZ to use. So we probably need to enumerate the provided subnets and just make sure that the AZ for all of them is included when we create the ELB.
Would we have to create, I mean, so if you've got, I'm trying to figure out, does he have two public subnets or just one in this example?
Just one.
Okay, but it needs just to be, can you attach an ELB to multiple AZs?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the problem.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to. I don't think this is a release blocker,
No, I
right?
agree.
Okay, and this one that you created, Jason.
Yeah, I've been doing testing on the images that I'm creating, and as I was tearing down clusters, I noticed I wasn't seeing all of the deletion events. Um, I
So
dug in.
the AWS cluster, like it was still there, but we weren't recording events to it.
Yeah. So I started the deletion process. I would see some of the events. I would get up to that delete manage security group event, and then I wouldn't see any other additional events related to the deletion after that.
Is that what this PR is for, or is this
No,
unrelated?
that's specifically to clean up where we're logging the events against, because right now we're
Yeah.
actually logging the events against the cluster object instead of the AWS cluster object.
But that doesn't address this issue.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. I was just
I'm
wondering.
just watching all events on the kind cluster, and yeah, it could be related to the fact that my kind cluster has been long lived, but I definitely wanted to dig into it further before I, ruled out a bigger issue.
All right. Well, I'll put it in the milestone. If we don't get it, it's not a showstopper, right?
Agree.
Hey Andrew, how's it going?
Hello. Sorry we're late.
No worries. So we're just doing triage on Kappa, and we're down to one that's just waiting more evidence. Actually, let's look at this since we didn't. So they tried to create, and it basically didn't. And oh, I think they were confused. So I'll just see. Did you ever get this resolved? Anything for the non-issue triage agenda from your end, Andrew? Anything you want to talk about today?
It's funny. The reason I realized that I was late was because me too, was creating a cluster and realized that like the load balancer being ready was taking long. And I was like, ooh, Jason mentioned this morning. Oh, wait, I'm late for the meeting. So no agenda items. I'm curious if there was a real issue behind the load balancer taking long, but that's it.
So I didn't have a chance to debug it much further, other than to know that for some reason the DNS propagation was taking an exceedingly long time, and it shouldn't be related to anything that we're doing. It seems like it's some type of a bug on the AWS side. And what's even odder is that the resolution's not working from the EC2 instances that we're creating too. So it's not like it's cached on some type of DNS server between AWS and us. The resolution's not working using AWS's DNS servers. So I didn't file an issue just because I didn't know, what we could really do about it, other than say, if you hit this issue and the DNS resolution doesn't work after a reasonable amount of time, delete the cluster and recreate it, and it should work. Because I just deleted it, recreated another one, and didn't run into that issue again. So.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. So we actually hit this from the context of pivoting on Vince's cluster CTL branch.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens there is the process kind of stops and it's waiting at kind of a weird spot that we weren't used to it waiting. Like it's usually hung on like waiting for control plane 0 to be ready or something like that. But this time it was like waiting to apply YAML. And in the middle of all this, like we got security groups and we got the load balancer, and it just kind of chilled there for a second. So maybe we need some extra, debug logging at that point in the pivot to see like, hey, I can't resolve this DNS or something like that.
Yeah, and this one's tricky, at least right now in the current state of V1 Alpha 1 and V1 Alpha 2, in that in order to clean it up, you can't just replace the load balancer, you also have to replace the control plane instance, because when you generate the new load balancer, now you need a different SAN on the certificate that you're generating on the initial control plane instance as well. So I don't know that there's much that we can do to be better about automating cleanup of it until we get to V1 Alpha 3 with control plane management.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we didn't even get a chance to like confirm that DNS resolution was even the problem on our side. I just was looking for like any evidence that anybody had seen something like this before, and then I remembered your message from this morning.
So I do want to talk about this one that I filed. So all of our retriable AWS calls use this function to create the backoff. And I think I did the math right. If you account for jitter, then the sum of the amount of time that we would be sleeping waiting for AWS to return a positive indication of whatever you're waiting on is 90 billion years, which is a long time. So I think that we should probably either switch to using the API machinery wait functionality, which I believe can give you some timeouts, like hard timeouts, or we can figure out some way to do it. But it probably would be nice to have a timeout of somewhere between 50 and 60 minutes when you're waiting for AWS to do anything. And the longer lived operations, or the operations that take longer, like waiting for the NAT gateway to be available, that can take a few minutes. Surely somewhere between 15 and 60 minutes is reasonable and a lot better than 90 billion years.
So I would probably say that we want to go closer to the shorter end of that, because right now all other operations would currently be blocked on it. Longer term, we probably want to have a better strategy around reentrancy, and then we could just basically return the item and requeue it or handle it some other way.
Yeah, so in both Alpha 1 and Alpha 2, the cluster and machine controllers now, like, they're not in any released versions of CAPI or Kappa yet, but at least in the released branches, you can set the flags that I just added to the manager to increase the concurrency for the cluster and machine controllers above the previously hard-coded value of 1. So if you want to reconcile 10 machines simultaneously, you can. And I need to do another PR to master to do the same support for AWS machine and AWS cluster for those controllers. So that would at least help with different clusters and different machines. But certainly if it is stuck waiting on a NAT gateway and for whatever reason AWS just never comes back with it, then yeah, we need some way to deal with that too.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's definitely more of a refactoring and non-trivial, but if we could do our waiting on the queue versus, waiting in process, it's probably better.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, at the very least, a short-term fix is to fix these numbers so that it's not 90 billion years.
Yeah, I think the sun will be out of LTS by then, and for the version of the solar system as part of the cluster API.
Yeah, I think so. Since we're here and there's not that many of us, and there's actually not that many issues. Whoops, I got the wrong milestone. So we have 22 open issues for our 040 release. And I know we don't have a full house here today, but maybe with those of us who are here, we could at least go through these 22 and decide if we want to still try to do them for this Friday or defer anything else that's deferrable. So I'm just going to start at the bottom and we'll go up. So number 1, ability to customize security group rules. This was requested, I'll say, a long time ago. So given
There's no way we could QA something this complicated.
No. Yeah, so I'm going to bump this to the patch release milestone.
So this is probably going to also require API level changes to be able to specify groups.
All right, so you want to move it to next?
I think so.
All right.
I think it's totally reasonable. Like, you could conceivably get all of the functionality of like being able to do that from the additional security groups field. Like most of the functionality, and that's what we do. So it's totally, I don't know, totally deferrable in my opinion.
Also, they survived without it for, what, 9 months?
Yeah. Yeah. This was Nadir, so I don't know if he was doing that on behalf of one of our customers or just something he was interested in seeing. But yes, I totally agree. It's been a long time and not implemented. So next it is. All right, document what you get in a cluster. I still think this is useful. It is a documentation issue. So given that it doesn't directly impact whether or not the code works, I think we can leave it in the milestone. All right, this one's been around for a while. I know we've done some effort to try and mitigate some of this, but it's not completely done, right, Jason?
No, and this goes into any additional changes would require much larger refactoring, and that's why we basically looked at just the implementing the exponential backoff to begin with. So I think it's safe to bump this.
Patch or next?
I think we should at least attempt to address it in the patch, but
okay.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to get some more detail on like, is this is like if the tagging fails, like the resource isn't there or something like that, and the back off basically saves us from that.
Yeah, the eventual consistency of the AWS API. So that was the initial one they were hitting. So the initial tagging would try to happen and it would fail because the resource was not found yet. And then we would basically orphan the resource. We're in a better state now with the back off, but ideally we should be using AWS client tokens wherever we can. And then that would ensure that even if we fail tagging, we should get the same result back if we call that, make that call a second time.
I see.
The downside there is that we need to ensure that we record that client token so that we could use it again. And it can't just be the UID of the object, because once you pivot or if you restore from backup, that UID is going to be different. So ideally what we would have to do is generate the client token, save that back to the API server, ensure that save is successful, and then we can go ahead and proceed.
Got it.
Okay, can I move on to the next one or anything else on this one?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Restrict IAM policies further to only allow deletion and possibly update of resources. Jason, it's marked long term. Should I just bump it?
Yes.
This is our, load balancer services and whatnot. Did you have a long-term solution on this one or not?
So what we can probably do here is we can just go ahead and clean up any load balancers that match the tagging that's done for the integrated cloud provider stuff. Yeah, it's just a matter of adding a query for those and then deleting those resources, because if the cluster is gone, I mean, you're not using the load balancer, you're not using those load balancers anyway. there's no risk of actual data loss there.
All right. I don't have any problems leaving this in for now, and if it misses Friday, it's fine to miss. All right. Documents and annotations, at least in terms of Alpha 2, these are not relevant anymore as they are here. So I'm going to put them in the 0-3 milestone. We can potentially just close this if we want to, given that at some point Alpha 1 isn't going to be maintained anymore. So, but I'll put it in 0-3 for right now, and maybe after I get back from San Francisco, I can actually document this. All right. Add validating webhooks for Alpha 2. I think this is still worth trying to do, and if it doesn't make it, it's okay. Sound good?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I have questions about how the certs will work.
That's the problem. It's
Yeah.
always the problem. So
So
I went through the KubeBuilder V2 webhook configuration flow and coding flow,
Yeah.
and I used Cert Manager to generate certs, and it works. There was at least one gotcha that I ran into with some of the YAML that got generated where I had to hack in a fix because of something that wasn't coded in controller gen, and I don't know if it's been fixed yet. But yeah, if you don't use that approach, then I guess you're sort of on your own.
Yeah, we have a couple other KubeBuilder controllers that use the webhooks, and we just have Cert Manager everywhere. You know, the question just becomes like, does that mean everybody who uses this either needs to provide a cert or use Cert Manager to, deploy Cluster API?
So I think because the KubeBuilder scaffolding revolves around the use of Cert Manager, that would probably be our default story.
Yeah.
And then if for some reason you don't want to use Cert Manager, then, you need to handle the certificates some other way.
Yeah, I'd say there's probably 3 options. There's option 1, which is I don't want to deal with this as an end user. And so, we just have a banner somewhere that says, warning, if you don't feel like dealing with certificates, then you're not going to have all of the functionality that we have coded for validation. And then the 2 options are the default being Cert Manager and then instructions for how to do a non-Cert Manager approach.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, it'd be really nice if we could get this in for the release, but it's not a breaking change if it waits until after Friday. So I think all of the labels and milestone are still accurate. Controller can generate ELB name that's too long. So this...
Yeah, it's basically the same issue.
What's that?
I said it's like, this is basically the same issue, right? Because it's going to be, I think by the bottom of these comments, we were like, cool, validating webhook.
Yeah. Well, I also was going back and forth on collisions and whatnot. So,
yeah.
I guess, so I have a question, like how important is the ELB name in terms of human readability to people who are using Kappa clusters?
We don't care about it.
Jason.
I know we have a long-term feature request that was asking to be able to provide some type of an alias, and then that would solve any potential human readability concerns. I don't think it's like huge, but I think just pure UID or UUID may, it may be a little off-putting to some.
Well, I don't think that this is something that I don't think this is a decision that we should make under, at the last minute here. So I'm going to move this to next, or at least propose moving it to next, given that it's not an API change per se. I mean, unless we we go with my suggestion of storing the ELB name in the cluster spec. But if we do change the way that we generate the names, then we either need backwards compatibility to try and find the old style, or we just need a clean break, which we probably don't want to do. So I think once we get Alpha 2 out the door, we can reevaluate everything that's in next, as well as the patch milestone. So what do y'all think? Is next okay for this one?
Yeah, I think yes.
Okay. All right. What do we got? We have conversion tool from Alpha 1. I know, Liz, you've been working on some of this. I don't think that this needs to make it by Friday, though.
No, I don't think so either.
Okay. I'm going to give it a priority. It is important soon. Okay, remove Bastion host requirement. Jason, I don't think this is anything we want to do for Friday, right?
No, and this because it would change kind of the status if we do remove it. We should probably bump this to next.
Okay. And HA cluster subnet reconcile miss to check and create route table. I remember asking about this one, but I don't remember. I think, okay, we can close this, right? It sounds like Snort was able to get this set up, and I guess they want Kappa to create the subnet if this was a bring your own, right?
Yeah, I think he expected the bring your own to do more than it did.
Oh.
I think there was an expectation that we would do the routing tables and things like that with just a bare subnet provided.
Yeah, I think if there are things like a subnet in this case that need to get linked to other things like route tables, using poor terminology, but I think you get the point, then you either need to let Kappa manage it fully or you need to manage it fully, but it's not 50-50. And that's different from saying something like, well, if you could bring your own ELB, we would let you do that. But it's not like that. Well, that's probably even a bad analogy. So yeah, I'm going to say it's got to be all or nothing.
Agreed, because I mentioned this in there, like it's impossible for us to determine the user intent,
Yeah.
If they wanted a fully public subnet or if they wanted a private subnet to be netted. We can't make those assumptions without breaking some type of user expectations.
Is that availability zone field a real thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I should pay attention more.
It got added to Alpha 1 and it's in Alpha 2 as well.
Because we have some crazy looping that like chooses the subnet and like looks it up like in our tooling before actually creating the cluster.
I believe it's a fairly naive implementation. I think we just picked the first one we can find in the AZ that is either public or private, depending on which flow we're in.
Got it. Okay.
I think. I have to double check to verify that. Oops. Let's close this. Okay. This is another one around reusing names in the same account. I don't think there's really a ton we can do here. right? Other than what Jason was suggesting about modifying the cluster name.
Yeah, and I would say it's probably too late in the cycle to attempt to do that.
The
So-
alternate thing to do here is a pre-admission hook that just prevents you from doing this. I agree that I don't think that this will. I agree that this should not block the release. I think we can move it into the point release, but I don't think there's anything that prevents us from doing this in V1 Alpha 2. There's no like fields or anything that I think we need to make this work properly.
Yeah, we could even, actually, what did you have in here? Validation. You know, we could, I think for this first one here that you wrote, Jason, in terms of validating, we could query AWS, like pick a resource, whether it's EC2 instances or ELBs or whatever, and check to see if that cluster name is already in use in any, just filtering by tags.
Yeah, that could work. We'd also have to make sure that we're only checking for currently active resources and not straggling deleted resources.
We
Yeah.
could also just try to create it and surface the error correctly if we fail. Just like have an event that says can't boot duplicate, something like that. I'm sure there's a, if is 409 conflict or something in the AWS API, but regardless, I think it's not critical to do right now.
Okay, cool. I agree. Make file maintenance, I'm just going to bump.
It's not user facing at all. We can do that whenever we want.
Yeah. All right. Clusters private subnet not discovered, preventing cluster delete.
Oh.
All right, so we don't actually have a reproducer yet, but created a cluster, got reconciled. How did he force delete it? Did he remove the finalizers, I wonder? Yeah.
The last time I talked to Daniel about this, he wasn't quite sure how he encountered it. And because he hasn't been able to reproduce it, I think it's probably safe to close at this point.
Okay. Okay. Convert project to Compute Builder v2. We already went over that earlier. Remove local image builder.
So this can make it. I can do this as part of the image work that I'm currently doing.
Rename controller manager we talked about. Unit testing would be nice.
It's a tough one, only because I guess figuring out like which is a unit test and which is like an integration test is a little bit difficult in these Cube Builder repos where like there's the big setup block that basically stands up a full cluster. And the reason why I think this is tough is because it takes almost like a little bit of design to figure out what goes where. Like for us in our Cube Builder controllers, we just put everything into that suite and just take the performance and timing hit. But it seems like in some of our repos, we have some unit testing. I'm sorry, in some of the Cluster API repos, like Bootstrappers specifically, there's like a bunch of fake client work that runs a bunch of tests. The issue with fake client in a bunch of these is that it doesn't care about a lot of the deletion stuff. Like fake client ignores finalizers. So there's a bunch of, I don't know, designing tests, right? I don't know.
Yeah, having significant experience using mocks in unit tests, I would love to avoid that. So whatever we can do to keep the unit tests readable and easily understandable would be nice. I'm just gonna, I mean, we can leave this here. We can move it to the patch release.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take this on, no problem. Just by Friday, I don't know. That would be in here.
All right, why don't we just move it because it's not a blocker.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about this one already, and that's an Alpha 1. And Jason's working on the certs. We talked about that, and we talked about that. So I think we are good in at least for having covered all of these. Anything else anybody wants to talk about?
Somewhat related to the Ubuntu image, I guess. Like, how much do we care about, I don't know, like security patches to those AMIs or something like that? Like, for example, there was some port mapper stuff that's default enabled on these Ubuntu machines, totally unnecessarily. But I don't know if it's like in scope or not for us to care about like patching all those little things and making new AMIs and stuff like that.
So the way we've approached it in the past is the images that we provide are simply for testing.
Yeah.
Just something to be there so that you can try it out, test, and that sort of thing. Anybody using Cluster API in production, we would expect them to provide their own images because then they could have whatever type of governance around those images that they require. That said, every time we push a new image, we try to fix up related security issues there. And that was part of the reasoning behind bumping containerd with this last one, because it includes the Go HTTP2 fixes in it.
Cool. Any color you like, as long as it's cloud in
it. Exactly.
Okay, well, I don't have anything else issue related, so we can wrap up if it makes sense.
Are we going to have this meeting 2 weeks from today? It's right up against the thing. What the heck? Yeah, the meetup.
I will probably. Actually, I don't remember when my flight is. I think I'm available, but I'm okay canceling it.
Oh yeah, I was just curious if it had already been decided because I know folks from my team will be traveling already.
Let me double check.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm traveling at the time as well. But
yeah,
if there's somebody
my flight's
available,
not till later.
I don't think it's a big deal either way, as long as there's somebody to host it.
Cool.
All right. That said, thank you all.
All right. See ya.
Bye.